why do we all need a podcast? If I'm a head coach, I'm like, fellas, just stay away from 2 words. Is it podcast 2 word? Whatever. Podcast. Stay away from the podcast. Because Nick, these guys get comfortable and they just start talking, and all of a sudden you pump the brakes, you hear the back pedal. Tyreek Hill. I understand what he was trying to do, Nick, but I mean, just it looks comfy too. You got the couches, you got the headphones and everything, but the podcast. We got to stay away from these.
Can you believe that the sports journos out there are afraid of people like Tyreek Hill? Can you feel the shift happening in sports? We're seeing the rise of the new media. While the clowns over at ESPN have held the throne for decades, times are changing. You have guys like Pat McAfee, Terrell Owens, and Brandon Marshall from I Am Athlete paving the way for players to go direct to the people. Aaron Rodgers was a regular guest on the Pat McAfee show. He was free to say whatever he wanted to say. This sports model is exploding. It's even allowing small channels like my own, really small channels, to compete with the big boys out there. YouTube gives us access to a global audience, just the same as theirs. And they're not liking this whatsoever. But we get to do something that they don't get to do. You see, they have audiences. They have broadcast audiences, but they don't build communities. We here on YouTube actually get to build communities. We get to have two-way interaction. That's how it's supposed to work. Network broadcasting can't do that. It's designed to talk at you, not talk with you. In addition, they are beholden to their corporate overlords, their sponsors, their CEOs, all of these things that we don't have to deal with. Yes, we have sponsors, but we dictate to the sponsors what the terms are, whereas the other way around, the sponsors dictate to the networks what kind of things they'll support. We can pretty much say anything we want to say, subject to YouTube's terms and conditions, but they can't do that, and that scares the crap out of them. As many of you probably know, Tyreek Hill started his own podcast a few weeks ago. He's probably one of the few, if not only, active player that has his own podcast. This terrifies the sports journals out there, as it very well should. Imagine players having a platform where they can go direct to the fans. They don't need to go through a reporter. They don't need to have something asked of them at a press conference. They can go direct to the fans. Obviously, Pat McAfee, Brandon Marshall, Tyreek Hill, they're all over the target. And these sports journos realize their livelihoods are now being threatened. Listen here to what Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk had to say recently about Tyreek Hill's podcast.
Tyreek Hill has a podcast, if you haven't heard. Episode 1 dropped a couple of weeks ago. It Needed to Be Said is the name of the podcast. Well, episode 2, which was about half the length of episode 1, consisted almost exclusively, if not entirely exclusively, of reaction to the reaction to episode 1.
Who says how this content is supposed to be produced? Who determines how content is supposed to be portrayed? It's up to the individual. Depending upon what audience and community you're building, you're going to make content that they want to hear or see. I don't think Florio understands that because he's been under the auspices of NBC for so long. Let's continue.
I really don't think it's sustainable if each episode is going to consist of reaction to the reaction to the prior episode. And there was no new ground plowed in episode 2. I mean, at one point, Tyreek talked about the differences between his relationship with John Dorsey, who was the GM of the team when he was drafted, and Brett Veach, who was the GM when he was traded. But that's not going to make any big waves.
It's not going to make any big waves, says Mike Florio, who obviously didn't watch Tyreek's last video. You see, there was a small part when he talked about ESPN and reacted to what people said. The bulk of it was he talking with Rick Ross about business. Obviously, Mike Florio didn't see that, or he chose to ignore it. My bet is he chose to ignore it. He didn't want to talk about Rick Ross and the business developments that he's working on with Tyreek. That was completely looked over, completely ignored. Pretty bad, Mike Florio. That's really, really bad.
The biggest stir was caused by Tyreek Hill saying he got death threats via social media. And I love it, he said. See, he wants to have the reaction. That's why they do it. That's why we do it.
At least he was honest about that. You see, maybe if you look up some of what Mike Florio has said in the past and what he was basically dragged for, it's kind of unsavory stuff that he did towards a certain, let's say, lifestyle that we have come to know lately. So how is he the one to tell Tyreek what he should and should not be talking about?
And you have to accept the fact that sometimes you may say things that people will react to in a way that you don't like. And when that happens, you just have to deal with it.
Okay, let me get this right. If you say something and then people say something in return, and if you don't like it, you just have to accept it and deal with it. No, Mike, that's the old way. You guys are dinosaurs. You don't understand. We have microphones. We have cameras. If you say something we don't like, we're going to call you out on it now. And Tyreek has every right to do so. Wow.
If you're going to go on a podcast, the first episode of a brand new podcast, and say something as outlandish as Tua Tagovailoa throws the football more accurately than Patrick Mahomes already.
Why was that so outlandish? If that was his opinion, if that's what he believed, are you calling the guy a liar? Because it's not outlandish if he believes it. He's out there running in the hot Miami sun, catching the passes. You're sitting behind a keyboard and a camera critiquing him for even having the outlandish statement you say about Patrick Mahomes versus Tua.
One of the all-time greats at the quarterback position, you're going to have a reaction. And you'll want the reaction, but you also want to reserve the right to complain about the reaction. And
I don't think Tyreek was complaining about a reaction. I think what Tyreek did was call you guys out about what you said. You went over and above. One of your compatriots called him basically on drugs, needed psychological help. You went personal. You didn't discuss his opinion. He had an opinion about Tua compared to Patrick Mahomes. And instead of critiquing the opinion, a lot of you guys went personal, called him nuts.
It's just kind of comical because for those of us who create content and understand how it works.
Whoa. For those of us who create content and know how it works. Wow, man, you're full of yourself. We all create content. What do you mean we know how it works? Do you see the eliteness that these guys have? Do you see how they just think they're so much better that they understand how this works? This is how it's supposed to be. You're insulting.
Number one, this isn't sustainable. And number two, I really don't think it's in the best interest of Tyreek Hill.
I have a question. Who do you think knows what the best interest of Tyreek Hill is? Mike Florio or Tyreek Hill? Pretty easy to determine that, isn't it?
He's trying to build a new image and reputation. He's with a new team, and all he's managing to do, frankly, and I'm not being a hater. I'm not saying shut up and play when I express my opinion. What he's doing is he's putting more pressure on the Dolphins to get him the football as often as he wants it, or otherwise they're going to have a problem, because we now know the Chiefs had a problem, even though Tyreek Hill didn't do anything about it publicly. If he gets 3 catches in a game at any point in 2022, we now know to ask. Reporters covering the team know to ask.
No. You miss it, Florio. You don't have to ask. He's not waiting for you to ask. Reporters don't have to ask. Tyreek now has a platform where he can answer questions directly. He can tell you how he feels. He doesn't have to wait for you guys to ask questions. Those days are long gone, man. Long gone.
You okay, Tyreek? You happy with your output today? You think they should be using you more? We now know that. He's flagged it as an issue. That's my opinion, and I'm entitled to express it, and I'm not being...
And he's entitled to express his as well. Nothing you can do about it.
Being a hater, and I'm not saying shut up and play. Look, I like it. I like content. I like to have things in late June to react to and talk about, but I really...
So he's saying he's bored in late June, and this helps him create more content for his network, albeit it's not getting as many views as Tyreek Hill's. You see where these guys are coming from? What do you say about that? What do you say when somebody just has to feel like they know better than you do? Isn't that exactly what Tyreek said in his last video? These people out there telling him now it's not in his best interest. How do they know what's in his best interest? I didn't see anyone telling Deshaun Watson to stay away from, these houses of ill repute. But now Tyreek, oh my God, man, this isn't in your best interest. You shouldn't be doing a podcast. Oh no, this is really bad. Shut up. So you might ask, Tyreek Hill is an NFL elite receiver who's played college football and now pro football at a high level. What's Mike Florio's background? Well, Mike Florio used to be a lawyer who started a blog, who then got bought out by NBC, who is now an authority on pro football. Yeah. Why is Florio afraid of Tyreek Hill? I'll tell you why. Because Tyreek Hill, as an elite NFL receiver, has a much bigger audience than Mike Florio. In fact, Tyreek's last podcast got more views than the video you just watched about Mike Florio. For that matter, my last video got more views than what Mike Florio's video got. So yes, these sports journals are terrified. I mean, absolutely terrified of what's coming. Listen now to what ESPN had to say about Tyreek Hill's podcast. It's unbelievable.
I understand the players on the podcast type of thing. It's like, why do we all need a podcast? If I'm a head coach, I'm like, fellas, just stay away from 2 words. Is it podcast 2 word? Whatever. Podcast. Stay away from the podcast. Because Nick, these guys get comfortable and they just start talking, and all of a sudden you pump the brakes, you hear the back pedal. Tyreek Hill. I understand what he was trying to do, Nick, but I mean, just it looks comfy too. You got the couches, you got the headphones and everything, but the podcast, we got to stay away from these.
Wow, he went there. Tyreek's going to blast Teddy. Teddy, be ready. Talking about having the, what matter if he has his headphones on? Why does that bother you that he's sitting there, he's relaxed, having a drink with his headphones on? Brandon Marshall and the guys from I Am Athlete, they're sitting around, they're eating, sometimes they're having dinner, whatever, while they're talking, relaxed. Pat McAfee in his tank top. Come on, you guys in your studios, now your home studios, don't realize the game has forever changed. I would love to see a coach tell someone they can't express their opinions in a podcast as long as he doesn't say anything, improper against the team. But new media is changing the game. These guys can't handle it, and I'm here for it. Why are these guys so afraid of athletes and little guys like me out here talking about sports? We know just as much as you do. Some of us played football at a very high level. Why can't we talk about football? You're putting women on television who have no idea what they're talking about, but you're terrified of guys like Tyreek, Pat McAfee, Brandon Marshall, and guys like me. That's because of the rise of the new media and the global audience that we now have access to, just like ESPN, just like NBC, and we don't need those platforms to build a huge community, a community being much more important than just an audience. Speaking of building a community, it's free. All you have to do is click the subscribe button. You'll see these videos. And if you want to see more videos about the Miami Dolphins, go ahead and click over here and see one of these 2 videos. Talk to you soon.